Welcome to What is Good, a podcast from the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, where we explore contemporary cultural issues through a biblical lens. Micah 6:8 says that God has told us what is good, that we're to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with Him. So whether you're seeking a better understanding of how to live that out, or you're just curious to understand a Christian perspective of what's happening in our culture, we hope that you'll find today's conversation helpful as we discuss what is good.
All right, welcome to What is Good, a podcast from the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission. My name is Katie Frege, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Christian Life Commission. I am joined today with John Litzler, our director of public policy. Hey, John.
Hi.
We also have Irene Gallegos, our director of hunger and care. Hello, Irene.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good.
Great. And then last but certainly not least, our director of ethics and justice, David Sanchez. Welcome, David.
Howdy, y'all.
Nice Texan answer there. We got to make sure they know we're Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission. So
should I just use this accent the whole time?
Oh man,
I'll let you make that decision. I hope our listeners stay with us. So guys, thank you so much for joining me today. This is a topic that I think is just an ongoing one that is not going away anytime soon. And I kind of want to set the stage a little bit for where we're going to go for this conversation, just for those listening. This morning, or this whatever time you're listening to it, we're going to be talking about overall this issue of life, the pro-life conversation, and a Christian holistic response to it in the world and culture that we're living in today. Just as a few precursors that I want to just establish some ground rules if I can. I think that this is really primarily a family conversation, if I could use that phrase, saying I don't necessarily think that anyone listening to this particular podcast would disagree that life is sacred and that we all, to different ways, want to affirm and uphold this concept that we call in Christianity the sanctity of human life. You guys know we so frequently point to Genesis 1:27 as really the foundation, not the only Bible verse by any means, but the foundational verse that really uplifts and affirms this idea of sanctity of human life, that God created every single human, male and female, in His image. And because we are made in that image, there is an innate dignity and value that every single image bearer has that's not earned or maintained in any way. It's just something that God gives us. And as just a foundational belief, I just want to go on the record and say that we all agree to this, that this is something that as we're trying to hash out how we live this out, it's all founded on this belief that life is beautiful and sacred because we are image bearers of the creator of the world. That is unique to the human condition to be made in God's image. And we're just trying to join, like David, trying to figure out what this means. In Psalm 8, he says, "What is man that you are mindful of him?" We're like, but we're not like the animals. We're like, but we're not like God. And so what does that even really mean? So even before we dive into a lot of this, I just wanted to set that kind of as this is the foundation that we're going to be building off of. And then where do we go from here? What are the ways that we can uphold this? So let's just set the tone too for at the time of this recording. Recently had what is called Sanctity of Life Sunday, and we're also getting ready to officially start a general election cycle where that might pop up occasionally, and you might hear politicians from time to time talk about this. Even if you look at the just next 12 months, you've got efforts to get abortion regulations on the ballot in 11 states, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New York, and South Dakota. So that's just to name a few. That points to this fact that this conversation is probably going to be something you're going to hear a lot about over the next few months. And politicians frequently like to weaponize this topic to pass their own agenda. And as Christians, that bothers me. That seems to be something that is antithetical to our Christian beliefs as people who want to affirm. And so I want to talk about this, but specifically focus on how we as Christians should be thinking about maintaining our witness. And I want to begin this conversation with the idea of the term pro-life itself. a lot of people think that the pro-life narrative, they think of it as something that started 50 years ago when Roe v. Wade established the constitutional right to an abortion in Texas. So for a lot of people, there's this idea that the pro-life movement really began 51 years ago with Roe v. Wade, which is funny to me because historically Christians have been people who uphold a culture of life. Christians in the first century were famous for taking in abandoned infants, and so this is a part of our DNA from the beginning. But I'm curious to hear from you all, what comes to your mind when you hear the phrase pro-life, and do you think of it more as a political term or a biblical one?
I absolutely think of it more as a political term, but I also spend a lot more time around politicians and in the field of politics, so I don't know if everyone thinks of it that way or not, but pro-life is definitely an adjective, and it's almost always a modifier in front of something. Is this a pro-life bill? Is this a pro-life candidate? Is this a pro-life policy? It's always modifying something, and the something it seems to always be modifying is political, not biblical. And rarely do I hear the phrase pro-life worldview, which is a little bit more encompassing.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I would say, I think of my first exposure to the word pro-life was my second year in college. My roommate was very active in even some of going before abortion clinics, and this is 2009. And a lot of things that she shared with me, I thought, did I live in such a bubble? I was not aware that people do this. And then fast forward some years later, working at a center for parenting and pregnant teen mothers, and it was not a faith-based organization. And so for me, my background is more in community health. And so I think of it in political terms mostly because of the background that I've had in working in a community organization that wasn't faith-based. You heard just the variation of opinions related to pro-life and politics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just add that I rarely hear that terminology when just even discussing things more biblical, more scripture. Usually if we're dealing with a similar aspect, we're just talking more about recognizing the value of life, honoring life, and not the term pro-life. So I've definitely always associated it with political linings.
And that really is an interesting thing to park on, because when we're thinking about a holistic understanding of life, which I think we would all agree that's what Christians should do, right? That the life is a whole spectrum, yes, beginning in the womb, but there's so many different life issues that manifest across the human experience. And it's difficult sometimes because there's this idea that political groups in America have claimed as theirs. Like, this is our issue. And so there's really a room, it seems like, for a third way. So you hear pro-life, well, that's Republican. Democrat, that's pro-choice. Does that seem fair to you all, that we put them all in these different categories? Or is there a third way that maybe Christians should be thinking of?
I think so. I think there should be a third way. It depends on how broadly you think of pro-life when you think of what's pro-life. If you think about it in a very broad sense, then there are both Republican and Democrat policies that would be considered pro-life. If you think of it as only dealing with prenatal life or unborn life, then it's a little bit more narrow. But a lot of this is because the political parties themselves have done this. So while there are voters who are Republican that would say they are pro-choice, and there are voters who vote for Democrats or that may even be registered for a political party that register for Democrats that would say they are pro-life, there aren't any pro-life or pro-choice candidates for the other party anymore because they've been forced out by their party. I mean, I remember, I'm not a very old man, I'm 38, but I remember when there used to be elected pro-life Democrat politicians, but they've been forced out by their own party. They're not allowed to run anymore. They've been primaried out. Similarly, if you're pro-choice, there is no space for you anymore in the Republican Party. And so our two-party political system has kind of drawn these lines in these circles and forced out anyone that disagrees on this issue. They've made it a test of fellowship, if you will, to be in the political party. And if you don't answer that question right, then you belong in the other party. And so they've really divided themselves over this issue in this way. So I do think it's fair to say that it's become a partisan issue in that aspect.
And I would add to that it's even unfortunate when you think of community organizations, people who may agree on the sanctity of life, may agree, that yes, human life, there's dignity to it. And I would think, and again, going back to the context where I come from, it's you create division among the staff, because when you make it a political issue, because then it becomes, well, are you Republican? Are you Democrat? We cannot work together. We cannot have the same shared ideas because of our political views. And so I think that even makes it difficult, because I think of grassroots organizations. They started with a passion, and that passion, that purpose. So whatever aspect of pro-life that is, whether that's restorative justice, whether that's for crisis pregnancy, whatever it may be, I think when you enter such heavy politics and make it about a specific party, then man, you lose this unity and why we started for the whatever purpose it may be. And so I think even on a community level, putting it into a partisan view, it just muddies the waters and makes it difficult for some groups to work together.
David, I know you've spoken so many times about the importance of active listening as a remedy to some of these divisions that we see in some of these conversations. I wonder if you would be open to reflecting a little bit more about that right now.
I just reflecting James 1:19, which is what I say quietly to myself every time my wife and I are about to get into an argument. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. So that means if I'm having a disagreement with someone, my first concern, my main purpose should be, are we communicating well enough with each other to find our place of unity? And my goal in that time is first going to be to just ask as many questions as I can, make sure that I understand where they're coming from. I find that a lot of times the unproductiveness that comes in conversations is because neither side feels like they're being heard, and then their response is just to shout louder. I know that that's not always how every conversation goes. Sometimes people just really want to win an argument, and in that case, you just have to say, okay, this is not ever going to be an actual productive conversation. But there are many times where if you could say, hey, let me hear your story, let me see where you're coming from, and then you realize that a lot of times these beliefs and even political beliefs are tied to very personal stories that these people have, where you can show compassion towards that story even if you don't agree with where they've come to land on the issue. I think that we'll find that as being helpful. We've got to make the room. The political parties aren't going to make room for us to have these conversations, so we've got to make the room ourselves. And we lead by wherever you stand on this. John and I, we were at the Texas Tribunal Trib Fest, right? And I was sitting next to someone who described herself as a flaming liberal. And so I just, to poke the bear, was like, hey, could we just share with you, like, here's some things you might be surprised that we backed at the Capitol that we see as pro-life issues, and we were able to start by finding common ground. I rambled a bit, but I hope that answered your question.
No, that's exactly the point that I think I'm trying to get at, that to maintain a Christian witness, I think we're going to, like you said, create the table itself and invite conversation in, because there are so many different ways we can uphold the sanctity of human life. Just right there beside this idea of the sanctity of human life is the dignity of human life. And there are so many different ways as Christians, as church members, and as lobbyists, and all the different manifestations of our ministry assignment, we can advocate and support human dignity. That yes, of course, it begins with the preborn, but then stop and listen to the stories of people and why they are at where they're at in their political journey. I was just recently listening to a movement. It was a dinner table movement, basically trying to invite people to your dinner table of all different perspectives and thoughts, just with the goal of creating empathy, to hear people's human stories and let that shape how you understand why they believe what they believe. That we've got kind of this vacuum of empathy in our culture right now that's leading to these hyper politicalizations.
I've been to one of those.
Really?
Yes, it was when I worked at this nonprofit, and I was so nervous, but our executive director encouraged, if we were interested, that it just to listen, really going back to that active listening. I was scared as all get out. I thought, oh man, you just sign up and they give you an address, and it's I don't know how all of them do it. It sounds sketch. It really does.
As the kids say, that sounds sus.
Yes. And there's some background. They get the information that they provide to you, but I was really nervous going in, and man, the differing opinions, it was very enriching, and I did not agree with a lot of the opinions in the room, but it was so unique to sit there and listen.
Isn't that amazing that we've gone from our parents' and grandparents' generations where you don't talk about politics or religion at the dinner table because it's not polite, to we've gotten so politically radicalized that we characterize each other and don't understand each other. And so we have to like intentionally seek out dinner conversations where we could talk about politics or religion to hear each other's perspectives because we'd been avoiding it for so long.
Exactly, but it humanizes the other perspective. And I think that that's such a crucial part as we advocate for life, and as this conversation predictably will probably only ratchet up in the months to come, I think it's going to take an intentional effort on our part as believers to actively listen, to make space at the table to listen, to build that empathy, to fight against what we've seen, which is this growth of dehumanizing one another. You're not a perspective, or you're not a person. You're a perspective. You are an opinion. You're not somebody created in God's image. So wanting to be able to create space for that, I think, is a huge path forward for us as we're trying to navigate kind of the waters of this post-roe world that we're living in now, where we want to hyperfixate on one or two issues without listening to others. So I'm curious, and we've kind of already been circling around this, but I want to just hear from each of you how your lived experience has shaped how you think about issues related to the notion or this concept of the sanctity of life. Just knowing each of you and your own backstories, y'all all have such unique experiences that are part of the pro-life movement. And so I'd love to hear from you on how your lived experiences have shaped your understanding of this idea of sanctity of human life.
So when I think of sanctity of life, and what we talk about on our team is, yes, there's topics of human life at birth. We have the topic of abortion, but one of the added values, I think, and something that is definitely close to heart in our conversations within the CLC, is looking at all forms of human life and dignity, and in particular when we talk about inmates. And so that's close to my heart, is having a family member who has been an inmate in our Texas prison systems, and knowing the stresses, the difficulties because of the environment. When I hear about no ACs, and not just read about it, but hear about it when a family member, a loved one, calls and says, it is hot, and I have just been sweating nonstop. I wake up sweating, I go to bed sweating. It's different when you have your own family member calling to tell you these shared experiences. And so I would think the sanctity of human life is certainly, for me, comes with an aspect of understanding and looking at family members and thinking of family members who have been impacted by different systems, and not only family members, but again, returning to when I think of the teen moms that I worked with, and so many faces just rush to mind right now, and just the beauty of their stories and the variation of their experiences too as teen moms. It's just, to me, I am encouraged to continue to dig into what is the sanctity of human life, how do we value human life, and faced with the situation where at that center, as a program supervisor, being asked by another member on the team to have a talk and discussion about abortion with a 19-year-old who was pregnant with her third child, and that child was deemed to have Down syndrome. And so faced with decision-making and conversations outside of faith-based circles, to me, having those conversations out of grad school, barely learning about a lot of pro-life talk even, has really expanded my perspective and understanding of sanctity of human life.
I love it. It's just this idea that, yes, certainly the preborn life, but it sounds like you're saying this, your lived experience of having a family member experience the indignity of having to live in inhumane conditions, and walking with young women and the challenges and very real struggles. It gives a totally different perspective that really highlights the need for a holistic approach to this conversation.
Yes.
So I grew up with a strong notion that everyone is wanted by God. Not only are we all made in the image of God, but that we're all wanted by God. And that, labels of wanted or unwanted were really harmful, not just for pregnancies, but, mothers and biological mothers and fathers not wanting their kids, as if that's somehow what determined your value, was whether your parents wanted you or not. And my grandmother was adopted. She was in a Baptist children's home that used to operate in Waxahachie. And she was adopted from that. My wife and I are foster parents. We have not adopted yet. We may one day. But, we believe that every person, not just child, but every child and every person is wanted by God. And I just think labels of being wanted or unwanted are very harmful. And that's really shaped that history, I guess, in my family of looking at your value is independent. It's innate. You're born with it, or you have it from creation. And that it's not dependent on whether, your biological mother or father put a label of unwanted on you, has really shaped a lot of the way I think about this issue.
Yeah. Katie, we've done a video before, which we'll link in the show notes, where we talked about having the similar experience, you yourself and me with my wife, of being presented abortion as an option after seeing complications with the pregnancy. And so for my wife and I, it was with our firstborn. I can remember the huge shift in atmosphere from seeing this little baby squirming around and to the untrained eye looking very healthy. And then for the nurse to be very quiet, not say anything, leave the room, and then for the doctor to come back and start pointing out all of the signs that our daughter had trisomy 18. And then just the process of saying from that, like, here's the chances that this child will make it through the first trimester, here's the chances through the second, here's the chances to the third. If they're actually born, here's the chances they'll survive for a day or for a year or for 5 years. And it's just like it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then he left the room, and my wife just looked at me and said, what are we going to do? And I feel like God gave me these words. I didn't, it wasn't something I had planned. It wasn't like I've prepared every day for this moment or anything. We hadn't really thought much about ever even having to face a situation like this. And I just said, we're going to honor life, whatever that ends up looking like. We're going to follow God. We're going to honor life. We're going to give this child her best chance to succeed in living the best life possible. But, we both came from great, amazing homes. We both have very strong faith. And there was a sense in which, in that situation, the answer was very easy and very obvious. And I could easily see people being in that same situation, dealing with the shock of going from joy to just just the pain of hearing the news. Mm-hmm. But then having to process, okay, well, what's it going to feel like for me emotionally to continue carrying this child that I don't think is going to make it, that probably isn't going to make it? Should I even put myself through that? How much emotional room do I have right now? And if it's like just a single mother going through that situation all by herself in that room, as opposed to, a couple, I can just see that being so devastating that abortion would seem like a really, really good way of dealing with the situation as a viable option. And so it's helped me to have a lot more compassion and realize, like, maybe I still see a right and wrong in this, but that doesn't mean I can't be compassionate towards another person in that situation and the struggles that they may have that might be even way worse than what we went through. Mm. I will throw in there, though, at the end that in choosing to carry, there were times where we still experienced great joy through the obedience. Like, I remember one time my wife just shared, like, she just had her hand on her belly and still felt the baby moving around. And she was just like, I know this baby has trisomy 18, but right now I just feel really happy. Mm-hmm. Like, I just feel really happy to be carrying this life.
I love that. It reminds me of a saying that we've said before in other conferences and events, that just there's plenty of space within Christianity for conviction and compassion, that we can hold firmly to our beliefs and what we believe the Bible teaches, but that doesn't void the need for compassion in those conversations, to listen, like we had already said, actively listening to people's stories and hearing the pain and the hurt that accompany them very frequently. That to me is the greatest need as Christians that we need to raise the alarm on right now, talking about our convictions in a way that still communicates our compassion and love for everybody and the whole spectrum of life. My experience is very similar to David's. We had a different outcome, though, and we're raising now 2 children. One has physical, one has intellectual disabilities. And in that experience, even, I have so much more compassion now for social services and holistic approaches to things, because I've seen how it affirms the dignity of my daughters and the need for that. And so even when I'm talking about policy that can be very dehumanizing or kind of gets into the weeds of partisanship, their face is in my mind every time. And I remember talking one time with a legislator about Medicaid expansion, and I literally just wanted to show him a diaper that they had gotten for my daughter through the Medicaid program, and how cheap it was and how it robbed her of dignity because they cut funding, and the trickle down for that was that she got cheap diapers. And his jaw just dropped because that wasn't where he thought Medicaid funding was going to go. Like when he thought we're going to cut it, it's like, well, let's cut off the fat, the overhead, and the administrative things. And when he realized it deprived a 7-year-old of quality diapers, it was a totally different approach, and it changed everything. And so I want to talk a little bit more about this, though, because in an interesting turn of events, since the Dobbs decision, I believe in 2022, most major, was it 22 or 21? I want to make sure I get this right. I don't want angry emails.
It was 22.
22. Okay, June of 22. Thank you, John. But in this really interesting turn of events, since this overruling of Roe v. Wade in 2022, most major ballot initiatives have been major victories for the pro-choice movement. And I'm curious, what do you make of that? If the overwhelming majority of Christians in the United States claim that they're pro-life, have we missed something? How are we seeing overwhelmingly these ballot initiatives going in a direction that don't necessarily align with what we would say are values of the pro-life movement?
John, would you say some of that was maybe even just a misunderstanding of what Roe v. Wade was actually doing within our states?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that deep divide has always been there. And there have always been different states and different regions of our country that have felt differently on this topic. One of the things that was so problematic with Roe v. Wade is that it was just this sweeping, brand new way of interpreting the Constitution that applied to all the states kind of right as debate on this issue was heating up, and it put a stop to it. You couldn't discuss it in your state anymore. The Supreme Court had interpreted there was a right to abortion, and that was it. That was the end of it. And so now that Roe v. Wade's been overturned, it is returning to people to discuss. We're about 50 years behind in having this conversation as a country, but different states are obviously looking at it differently. And I think what we're learning from a lot of these jurisdictions where voters are turning out and saying, no, we don't just want a blanket ban on abortion, is that, as we've discussed already, it's a very nuanced topic for a lot of people. A lot of people think about it in nuanced ways. They may just put themselves in a pro-life or pro-choice category. But when you stop thinking about it as opinions and look at people and people you know, like y'all talked about earlier, everybody knows somebody who's been affected by abortion. So either you've been affected by it personally or a family member or a friend. And so, yeah, I think a lot of this, to me, was to be expected once the Supreme Court took its thumb off the scale and said, okay, yeah, that was a wide sweeping doctrine and we're going to reverse that. We're going to return this back to the states. This is the type of discussion I was expecting to come.
So let's play off of those conversations a little bit. I want to expand the conversation beyond just birth then, because really that's where I think the conversation is going to have to head. The majority of research tells us, we know that there are tangible issues that contribute to a person's choice to abort a pregnancy. Just to name a few, we know affordable childcare, affordable housing, livable wage realities, communal family support. Those are all tangible things that impact a person's choice, when they're looking at just the whole spectrum of what it means to have a child and raise a child and all the factors that go into it. I'm also very aware of the fact that the overwhelming majority of people who choose to have an abortion probably already have a child living in their home with them. Mm-hmm. So it's not that they're unaware of what it takes to raise a person. And so it's a calculated and measured risk of saying, here are all the options I have ahead of me, and here's the best choice. And that leads to why you all have heard me say so many times, we've got to start thinking about how do we make abortion unthinkable. And to me, one of the ways of making it unthinkable is helping her with the needs that we know she already has with that, and expand that even more out. This idea that the gospel is innately political but not partisan, talking about these complex life issues ranging, yes, from the pro-life pre-birth issues, but also immigration, addiction, social support programs for individuals. I'm very aware there are obviously strong disagreements across the political spectrum on the best solutions for it. But I think it's still worth having the conversations to listen to the people, to hear what their needs are. So I want to take a few minutes and let's just talk about what role you see Christians, but more specifically also the local church playing in what I would say this messy but necessary process.
I immediately think of the cliff analogy, where if you have people who are at the edge of a cliff and could potentially fall off the cliff, you wait and have an ambulance ready at the very bottom of that cliff to aid them in their time of need? Do you set a net even higher up to catch people so that they don't fall all the way down to the bottom and need the ambulance? Do you put a barrier at the edge of the cliff so that they don't even fall off the cliff? You won't even need the net. You won't even need the ambulance. And in public health, you hear a lot about social determinants of health and how often there are these systems and what you discuss as far as socioeconomic factors that end up pushing people towards the edge of the cliff. And even then, they might have a net available, but it's a net that has holes. And even then, they might have an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff to be able to aid them in time of need, but that ambulance may have a flat tire. And so there is just so many factors. And oh man, I just rejoice at, we have the blessing through the CLC to support ministries and programs in the community that are through most of them, or many of them are through the local church, who address these situations, who are there. They are a piece of what we're talking about here, is being able to be the hands and feet of Christ, to be able to feed the hungry, to care for the marginalized, and really provide a tangible resource. And so when I think of, you have a socioecological model that talks about there's different layers and how do you address situations, and you have intrapersonal, interpersonal. That's what the local church, we're meeting needs. We're also working at policy levels, and we move the needle there. What's so beautiful is the fact that, we can provide a tangible resource, and we can be advocating and moving the needle at a political level, but we can also help someone in the here and the now and provide an immediate need. Even as simple as helping to pay a bill so that person doesn't have to turn to other sources such as payday loans.
Can we brag on our own churches? Is it okay to do that during this time?
You can. I've also got a follow-up. I was going to say, what churches have you seen that are doing this well? I don't necessarily want to make this a bashing session, because realistically, this is where the church shines her brightest. This is who we were made to be. And I think we do a great job of this. I definitely think there's room for improvement, to create more conversations, add more netting, air up that tire on the ambulance, and all sorts of different things if we want to keep with that metaphor. But this is really, I think, where we're at our best. And so I'd love to just hear, where are we at our best? What have y'all seen churches doing that seem to actually be making an impact in this, and how can we help highlight them so others can mirror it?
Yeah, at our church, we have a food pantry once a month, and it's amazing to see how long that line of cars is, and inevitably the food runs out before the cars run out. I don't think there's ever been a time where we had enough food, but we still had some to give, to be of help in that way. Our church also has ESL ministry, but what really stands out to me is we have what many people might have heard of, a ministry called Embrace Grace, and that's just a ministry that encourages young women who maybe don't feel like they have a lot of support, who are pregnant, to come to a place where they can find community and where they can find support. And we give them trainings in these things. There's some of you could probably describe the ministry better than I'm doing now, but they'll do a baby shower, and the people of the church will contribute and give them so many things, not just diapers, but also bottles and car seats, all sorts of things that they need. And a lot of times these women find that also the hope of Christ through that, but find themselves feeling so much more able to carry a child after they feel like there is a community that's supporting me to do this.
And to me, like that is the church. When you think about the early church, these sold things to be able to help one another. I mean, how are we helping one another? How are we there? And I love these organizations and ministries. I think of First Refuge Denton, who really has these comprehensive services, that medical clinic, dental clinic, social services. They have, they offer, food distribution. And so I think of Lubbock Impact, who, again, in a place that has such comprehensive services. And these are ministries that we support through our Texas Baptist Hunger Offering and community care grants. And it's beautiful to see the local church at work and even teaming up with local organizations and local ministries to be able to say, they have a model, they are doing it well. Let's come alongside a ministry who's doing this very well, and let's be the presence of Jesus in the community and be the church, be what God called us to do in our communities.
I think I see our Texas Baptist churches doing this really well I see our churches, they donate diapers and formula. They support crisis pregnancy centers in their communities. A lot of those centers are started by them and by their volunteers. I think I've heard you say this before, Katie, but everywhere the gospel flourishes, you see the spreading of hospitals and orphanages and that kind of thing. Like y'all say, that is what the church is. That's what we do. The church at large, Christians are twice as likely to adopt. They're twice as likely to foster. And I know that adoption is complicated and it's not always the solution for every woman considering an abortion or considering having a child. But, nearly 3/4 of women, 73% of women who have abortions say they would prefer to parent if their circumstances were different. So what does it look like for us as the church to make those circumstances different? And that's part of why I love the way you phrase the question, Katie, not what do we do to change minds on this? Although there may be some minds that need to be changed, but what do we do to make this unthinkable? So when we're talking about, say it was a jurisdiction where there's no restrictions on abortion at all whatsoever, 3/4 of the minds don't need to be changed. They already agree. So it's not a question of how do we convince you that this child being born is right. It's a question of how do we make circumstances better. You would prefer to parent, so how do we come alongside you and help you parent? And that would cut abortions by 75%.
Yeah.
If we could just do that. We're not arguing with people trying to change their mind. We're in agreement. So how do we help you make this unthinkable? Would it be unthinkable if you had the right financial support, if you had the right resources, if you had emotional support, someone you could call? What would make abortion not even pop into your mind as an option or a possibility?
And I just think time and time again how this so perfectly aligns with just the biblical passages of Scripture that say it command God's children to constantly be aware of the needs of the people who are vulnerable and marginalized in their community. Both in the Old and the New Testament, that is a consistent theme that we see, that God's people are to be marked as caring for people at risk of being exploited, taken advantage of, marginalized. Multiple examples across the entire spectrum of Scripture shows us that this is something that God really cares about, that He's created us to care about, and this is really carrying on the mission that has began with the very beginning of God calling His people to be His own. So it's definitely not just a partisan issue. It's something of being faithful to our gospel example in our communities. And it kind of answers it, but I did want to ask if you had any other thoughts on reasons a church should be involved in a ministry like this beyond voting in a ballot box. And I know I just kind of reflected on that, but does anyone else have any other thoughts on why churches are involved in this, not making it a partisan issue. Obviously, we still want people to vote, and we believe in citizenship and want people to do those things, but putting it beyond that. Any other thoughts on that?
And I think of the church that so many within want to, love evangelism, discipleship. Those are needed aspects, of spiritual transformation. And I think, again, it just, when Jesus had his ministry, when he was walking the earth, had his ministry, it was beyond food distribution, if you will. He provided that good news through a tangible resource. And so I just think it's so practical. And if anything, it's like, okay, I think again of the public health sphere that is so focused on equitable resources, and again, kind of that cliff analogy, helping to prevent people from being pushed to the edge of the cliff, to provide economic stability, to provide educational resources, healthcare access. And to me, it's okay. The world is seeing the need for these things. And truthfully, we can say as a church that those are pro-life issues. Those are going to help individuals to not have to be in a situation where they have to weigh the risks and consider these factors. And so I just think I see so much of the world engaged in a lot of the conversations of, again, these social determinants of health or aspects that are pushing people to tough decisions. Well, how can we as a church, and again, so many ministries are doing it well. And a shout out to even our a local association, Dallas Baptist Association, who helps churches who are doing food distribution. They go through a book study to be able to ensure that they're doing it well, not just doing it, but doing it well and doing it effectively. And so I value just the Baptist resources and our Texas Baptist resources that are ensuring that we are continuing. Baptists have historically been present in times of need.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful to see that continue. And I love that. All the more reason for churches, the local church, to continue to be involved in ministries that are part of community outreach. And the beauty, again, of our hunger offering and community care ministries is that they're not just providing food, they're not just providing a resource, but they're doing so in Jesus' name. And they may not lead with the gospel, but I know for a fact that they're incorporating and coming from a gospel-centered perspective to be able to lead people to Christ.
Right. So it's this idea of starting at the foundational concept is that every person is an image bearer and has innate dignity and worth, and as many ways and places that we can affirm that and share in our conviction of that, of being the hands and feet of Jesus Christ, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. It's just this holistic approach that we've talked so many times as a team about, of how can we, as holistically as possible, share the gospel and be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ in their community.
I like the way you worded the question of how, what are the reasons for a church wanting to be involved in ministry beyond the voting in the ballot box, because I think of my mother who has passed away about 10 years ago now, and how she would vote Democrat. And she voted Democrat because she was a public school teacher. And so she wanted not a raise, but she saw how underfunded the schools were. And that issue for her was what made her always want to vote Democrat, even though, you couldn't be a Democrat and also be pro-life in that sense. But every Wednesday she would go to, Katie, what's the name of the pregnancy center off of Bluebonnet Circle?
Fort Worth Pregnancy Center?
Yeah, every Wednesday she would be serving at Fort Worth Pregnancy Center. And so while some people might point to her and say, wow, how could you vote Democrat? She was there at the pregnancy center on Wednesday nights trying to encourage women who were in a time of crisis to keep their child and just trying to be, like you said, the hands and feet of Jesus in that moment to her. And so I cannot help but think of James in that situation, the book of James, and just how our faith is, you show me your faith without works and I'll show you my faith by what I can do. Yes, voting is a work. It is something that we do. We should vote according to our faith, and we should take seriously the responsibility that we have as citizens in this amazing country that God has allowed us to be a part of. But at the same time, There's a whole lot more we can do that would take a lot more time and a lot more sacrifice than just one day going to a ballot box. And we've got to ask, if I'm really pro-life, am I going to be doing those things as well? And this is what the church needs to be doing, because again, James 1. I'm really liking James 1 today.
James is my favorite book of the Bible. Just a shout out to James.
Yes,
big fan.
James needs a shout out. Okay. But just, religion that our Father accepts as pure and faultless as this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And I'm pretty sure God is comfortable with us looking at the term widow and also including single moms of today as being in a very similar economic situational predicament. Maybe not quite as bad as it was in the first century, but it's still definitely not easy.
Good.
And the church needs to be that. Like, why is it important for us to do this as the church? It's because it's God's heart, and maybe God commanded us to.
Absolutely. And David, I know you know this, but I so frequently try to remind people that when we talk about, when you see in Scripture orphans and widows, those two people groups were uniquely at risk of being exploited and taken advantage of. So I always encourage people, who is the equivalent of that in 2024? Who is most at risk of those things? And apply all of the things they say in James 1 to them too. Okay, I do want to switch this up for a minute, if I may, because so frequently when we are talking about pro-life issues, I think understandably and maybe rightfully, it's a female-centric conversation because it so intimately involves the female body and, more oftentimes than not, the burden, if I could use the word, maybe that's not the best term, but the responsibility of child-rearing disproportionately maybe lands in the lap of the female. However, it takes two to tango, and we love and support our brothers in Christ, and dads are such a crucial piece of this conversation as well. So I want to flip the script for a minute and specifically ask you guys, David and John, as y'all are dads and men in support of supporting what I usually refer to as this culture of life, what role do you see men specifically having as we navigate this new kind of world that we're trying to get towards?
First, I just love that Katie asked this question, and I like that you've invited us to be part of the conversation in this way, because it is very difficult to express an opinion on this as a man, because a lot of the response is, if you're not a woman, then keep your mouth shut about this. Like, this, is not your issue. But I think men are responsible for most, if not all, but a lot of those circumstances when mothers say that they're prepared, they would love to parent if circumstances were different. A lot of those circumstances are men and their behavior and their actions and lack of support. And so one thing men can do is stop seeing certain things as the mother's job to do or the woman's job to do. And I still know men who refuse to change diapers. That's a silly example, but I'm like, you got to be kidding me here. You're a team. I don't care if it grosses you out. Get in there and change diapers. And the fact that you're not even willing to support in that little way is problematic. But abortion has been, in a lot of situations, not always, but in a lot of situations, it's a tool that men use so that they can live their lives the way they want and not deal with consequences. And they encourage women or manipulate women, or in some situations force women to get abortions they don't want. They want to throw money at a situation. They see child rearing as a hindrance, as something that could slow down their career or their life. And so men need to step up and be good partners and spouses and parents and be ready to help parent. I know that whether to foster or adopt is not for everyone. That's a situation every family needs to deal with. And for some families, those types of things are for them, and for others, there aren't, for a variety of reasons. But one of the things I'm really heartbroken about is how many couples I know who have gone through that conversation. Maybe they've had infertility struggles or something like that have caused them to think about these possibilities. And the woman in the relationship is open to something like that, fostering, adopting. And the man is like, absolutely not. I'm not going to do it, not going to consider it, not going to think about it, not going to talk about it. And it just makes me sad that by and large, it's men who are preventing thinking about these types of things when it comes to a pro-life type culture.
That's really good, John. I'm going to not take credit for my answer because, Katie, it was you sharing about your husband that opened my eyes to this. But we often picture the woman coming into the pregnancy center, coming in alone, or a teenager coming in alone, or maybe coming with a mother. But occasionally the guy is, surprise, surprise, actually there. And maybe he needs someone too. Maybe there needs to be a guy in the pregnancy center for when the guy comes in to be like, hey, guess what? Fatherhood is awesome. Hey, guess what? One step at a time, just be with her, and you can do this. Hey, guess what? Yes, you're going to have to think about providing for them now. That's part of life. That's something we all have to do. And that's something men all have to do. And it can be a joy. And there's different ways of looking at this besides just, this could wreck everything. Guess what? This could be the best thing that ever happened to you. And being able to actually be there in that situation and speak encouragement into a man and challenge him to literally man up and become the leader of the situation, become an encourager, become a source of provision and protection the way God has designed us to be. That needs to be spoken into. It's probably not a message he's heard very much.
I wanted to add real quickly too. I do think it's critical to change hearts and minds and to strengthen men and encourage men and help men change their perspective on this. But I'm also not above just flat out coercing men. So there's some great legislation that's been proposed in Texas. One of the bills basically says, hey, if a child is born to you, we're going to make that child support retroactive from 9 months from the birth date. So that it doesn't just cover everything from pregnancy on, but the medical bills and prenatal vitamins and all the stuff that the mother incurs ahead of time. And I'm 100% behind that. And it was fascinating to see the testimony at the Capitol. Every single person who testified against it was a man. And basically not wanting to have to pay retroactive child support for those 9 months. And I'm like, look, I would love to have a conversation with you and convince you of the importance of this and supporting a culture of life, but I'm also not above a regulation that just says, no, we're going to order you to pay it, whether you want to pay it or not, you know.
I even think of a friend of mine who experienced or had an abortion in college, and one of the reasons that led to her choice for that was if the school found out she was pregnant, she would lose her scholarship. But nothing would happen to the guy who was also a student at the school for getting her helping get her pregnant in that process. Just the inequalities, even in the way that some of the laws are, incentivize this whole culture that you guys are speaking to. And David, you had kind of made a mention to this, but I just want to play off of it because I think my husband's also awesome. Love him. Shout out to Lafayette, husband of the pod. Can I use that term?
That's a question for you and Irene. David and I aren't going to battle you for it. So.
But he spent quite a few years volunteering in a very, very popular crisis pregnancy center here in Texas. And first of all, just the idea of a man volunteering at a crisis pregnancy center is not something you hear frequently. And people asking questions like, wait, what? Like, they just assumed I was the volunteer. So it was always fun to be like, no, he's actually the one there. But another thing that I just know from his own anecdotal experience that was really powerful was also just being there with the guys to say not just what David is saying, like, hey, fatherhood's awesome, but also giving them permission to be like, hey, it's okay if you don't know what you're doing. Like, I didn't either. That's just a part of the parent experience. A lot of them either didn't know their dads or had a very close relationship. So just having someone else say, you know what, I kind of blacked out too when she told me when my wife told me she was pregnant. I had no idea what I was going to do. But then that day when I got to finally hold her, like, it was the best day of my life. Having those kind of conversations also seem to really help them feel excited or empowered to be able to do the things that you guys are talking about.
It's good.
All right. Well, finally, we always like to end with the question, what is good? It's a time where each of us shares something positive that's going on in our world. So as our final question for today's episode, I want to ask you all, what is good?
My daughter is a kindergartner this year, and Stephanie and I have each had some opportunities to be up at the school. Stephanie has taken some time off from work once in the fall and once in the spring semester to do some substitute teaching. I've taken some PTO once in the fall, and I'm going to do it again in the spring to do a program called Watchdogs, where dads are in the school doing different activities and get to spend time in the classroom. And I just think it's beautiful and important. And I love seeing our community, and I love seeing the kids in our schools. And it's just a really important and valuable perspective. When I did the watchdog thing the first time, they said that they used to have 2 watchdog slots per day. And this year they increased it to 3 because they had enough dads who wanted to do it or weren't getting the opportunity. And so I would just say public involvement of parents in public schools is what is good.
Love it.
I think based on the conversation today, I'm just grateful for the people who have gone before us in these conversations. And so when I think of the celebration of the overturn in 2022, I think of the victory that people who poured in so much time and effort for years to advocate, to speak up, to be that voice, to care for so many. And I'm just grateful for those who go before us in the conversation, for those who are still in the conversation, and the way that we can be a voice in discussing pro-life.
John, can I pick your brain for my what is good?
Sure.
Because you mentioned a bill that we would say is pro-life, which forces men to give retroactive support. Was there not also a bill passed very recently that made certain needs of young mothers and the babies no longer taxed?
Yes, it removed sales tax. So in this last legislative session, a law was passed, and the governor signed it into law, that removes sales tax on diapers, formula, breast pumps, similar type items.
That's mine. Thank you, John.
It was very timely for our second child. Very timely.
That's awesome. I didn't think about that, Irene. That's exciting.
Yes.
Okay, so mine is not nearly as deep as some of the ones you guys have put out there, some really great what is goods. But I will share with you all, if you are a subscriber to Disney Plus, we have been really enjoying the Percy Jackson series. New episodes drop on Tuesday nights. And as a backstory to this, my now 12-year-old daughter, this was really the first series that really lit her love of reading on fire. She devours every single thing that Rick Riordan puts out. And the Percy Jackson series was the very first one. And when they turned it into a movie, it was a disaster. It was like a slap in the face to every person who ever read the books. And it broke her heart. And now this series on Disney Plus, Rick Riordan is helping be a part of the script writing, like the whole process. He's a piece to it. And it's like a love letter written to his readers. It's like, I'm sorry for this. I give you this. And she is loving it. It really is exactly what all of these kids, I kind of feel like Percy Jackson is the Gen Z Harry Potter. If I could use that analogy, like I kind of grew up with Harry Potter as the boy who lived. She's growing up with Percy, and it's what her heart needed after the devastation that was the Percy Jackson movies.
Katie, what age would you say is great? Like my daughter is 5. She hasn't gotten into Percy Jackson yet, and I don't even know if it's particularly age appropriate. Like around what age do you think like parents would do? Because we have Disney Plus, we could watch it.
No, I think I would watch it ahead of time for your own comfort level with that. It can be, the only thing is it can be dark. Percy, like within the first, and this is not a spoiler to me, but like within the first like chapter or 2, Percy's mom is abducted by a minotaur and taken to the underworld, and it's pretty graphic, and that could be scary for a kid who has a very vivid imagination. And then
yeah, that's my daughter.
This last episode, they went to the underworld, and there's a whole field of souls who live with regret, and like the regrets are grabbing them like roots, and it's pretty vivid. It's cool, but you have to be able to handle that.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, well, thank you for joining us for today's episode of What is Good, a podcast from the Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission. Hope you can join us for the next episode.
So occasionally our little boxes have words at the top next to the little recording light that say actual recording is higher quality. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I wonder how much higher quality. Like, are they changing my words to make them better? Like, how much of an improved quality are they giving the things that I'm saying right now?
John, that's the next AI upgrade, actually. It's going to take what we said and then elevate it up by an entire grade level. So
I don't care if the sound is better quality. I want the words to be better quality. Can you help me with
He
that?
gives me a Morgan Freeman filter, so that's all it wants from me is a better, less Kermit-y voice.